Is the government's economic plan coming off the rails? Did austerity help Britain tackle COVID? And do we need to be more patriotic? This is Politics Live. With me today, Conservative MP and Chairman of the Health Select Committee, Steve Brine, Labour MP and former Minister, Margaret Hodge, former Conservative Special Advisor, Salma Shah, and the Director of the think tank British Future, Sundar Katwala. Today, inflation in the UK remains stubbornly high. The government responds.
Today's figures strengthen the case for the government to stick to its guns. No matter what the pressure from left, right or centre, we won't be pushed off course.
It's likely to mean further pain for homeowners.
We live hand to mouth, so we don't have any money left at the end of the month. And well, in fact, making ends meet is a struggle.
It's likely to be the main focus at Prime Minister's Questions. We'll have that for you live at midday. Also today, did austerity make it harder to tackle COVID?
If we had not had a clear plan to put the public finances on a sustainable path, then we would not have had the fiscal space to deal with the coronavirus pandemic when it hit.
And our guest says patriotism can end our culture wars. So do we need more of this?
Patriotism, fairness, a love of family.
We love this country as you do. This is the country I grew up in.
Today's news dominated by the latest inflation figure for the UK, here covered by BBC News. It stays at 8.7%, despite hopes of a fall. Yes, the inflation rate is stuck. Despite predictions it might drop slightly in May last month, it just hasn't done so, and the government is desperate to bring the rate down. It certainly raises fears the higher prices are becoming embedded in the economy. Is the government's plan working, Steve?
Not yet, but if you listen to what the Chancellor said, I mean, what is the alternative to what he said? Oh, yeah, I think we should just rip up the plan to reduce inflation. I think we should rip up the plan to reduce debt. I mean, you know, I don't know if that's the Labour policy, but, I mean, clearly that's got to be the right there's got to be the right ambition. I remember when, you know, our opponents and you guys in the media were saying, well, of course, you know, on the 5 priorities, you know, at least 3 of them, they're going to be dead easy to meet anyway. They're going to happen anyway. So, you know, he's just said them. And there was that level of cynicism. They were never easy. And, you know, Rishi Sunak, anybody who knows him, and I know him well, he certainly didn't pick 5 priorities when he took over as Prime Minister that he thought was going to be easy. But they are the priorities of the British people. They're certainly my priorities as a constituency MP. And, you know, all the stuff about mortgage time bomb in the papers and the political ramifications that we'll hear at PMQs. And you're right, if Keir Starmer's smart, he will go on the economy today. You know, that's one thing. You know, I guess, like Margaret, I'm less concerned about the politics of it. I'm more concerned about, you know...
Well, we'll come back. We'll come back to that. I mean, listening to what Steve says, do you agree that it's the only plan? It's the only option? Is it?
Let's have higher inflation.
Well, first of all, I've just got to say, Steve, it's not a stuff about mortgage interest rates. This is going to impact on millions of people right across the country.
Literally what I just said.
People are going to lose their homes. You've been around now for 13 years. You know, you have to take responsibility for the way you've mismanaged the economy. We haven't built homes. The renting market is absolutely out of kilter. You know, rents in London now take up 40% of people's incomes. We are in a terrible, terrible situation. You have to take some responsibility for that.
Look,
I think, if I can just say,
yeah,
it's not you know, there are obviously global factors, and that's what you'll come back on.
Well,
there are obviously, but no, there is also there's the Liz Truss budget, and you know that mini budget has impacted on over 6 million households in terms of mortgage.
Right.
And I have to say, the other thing is
just
the
briefly.
mismanagement.
Well, let me ask you both two things.
Brexit.
All right. Well,
okay.
that's another issue. Although you may be right that it's a contributory factor. Just very briefly, do you take responsibility for the situation we're in now? Yes or no?
Well,
Well, been for
yes,
30
of course the government
And Margaret, what
is
would
the
you do
government.
differently? What would you do right now? I accept what you're saying, the history, 13 years, they take responsibility. What would you do right now if you were Chancellor?
Well, I think there are three things that we need to do.
I was hoping for one.
Apologies.
The best one.
Well, I think you have to bring back growth. Under the Labour government, we had growth, 1.4%.
Okay.
I think the next thing is stability, and I think which we haven't had, and that the Liz Truss budget is an example of that.
Well,
and the third thing, I think, is trying to tackle the inequality between individual households and inequality between regions. And those are the three things that we would need to do.
Is the government's plan working, Salma?
Well, no, not at the moment. But I also think we have to create the distinction that actually the toolkit for managing inflation sits with the Bank of England and the governor. So a lot of this is going to be about what the governor of the Bank of England does in terms of where the rate rises are going to go.
Well,
and that is
going to do that.
Yeah, and that is real pain. I think ultimately, if we're asking questions about what is possible, the Chancellor is not going to be able to try and help homeowners with direct help. It's not the same thing as the energy prices and intervening to help with bills on that. Because ultimately you're asking people who are not on the housing ladder to pay forward for people who do have mortgages at the moment, and that is a really unfair thing to do. I think Margaret has a point, and it would be interesting to see what the policies are around housing when obviously there's a market here, and we need to understand actually where the government can intervene, especially for renters. So it's a very complex picture, but let's not lose sight of the fact that the governor of the Bank of England is the person who's going to have to make these decisions.
Is the government's plan working?
Well, I think it's a real struggle to say it's working. I mean, everybody, left, right and centre, can agree on some big picture things. You want to see long-term growth, productivity, more houses. What you do in the short term is really painful. It's difficult to say to people, because of inflation, the economy is running a bit hot when there's no growth and there's no wage growth. So I think the politics of this are incredibly difficult, and it's incredibly painful for the government, as it would be for the opposition.
We'll come on to the politics in just a moment. Let's talk to Stephanie Flanders, Senior Executive Editor for Economics at Bloomberg. Stephanie, why isn't inflation in the UK, or the rate of inflation, coming down?
Well, part of it is that even these more than a dozen interest rate rises that the Bank of England have put in, the impact of that has not entirely been felt. I think there's about half of what we would consider the tightening impact, the slowing down impact on the economy, has still to be felt, because it takes a while for that to work its way through. That's one reason why we're looking at these people renegotiating their mortgages over the next year. That's part of the pain, that's part of the impact of these rate rises. So part of it is a waiting game. I think relative to other countries, it's taking longer because we had a bigger hit to energy prices than the US did. So we had higher inflation to begin with, and it hasn't come down as quickly. And relative to Europe, we've also had not just wage growth, but also profit margins growing. Quite a lot of markup we've seen in profit margins by companies. So there's a mixture of things. We seem to have sort of got ourselves the worst combination of those three across the major economies.
And we're expecting the Bank of England to raise interest rates again, possibly by a quarter, but possibly by 0.5%.
Yes, I think the chances of that have gone up a little bit because of today's numbers, but actually we still believe that a majority of that committee that sets interest rates will go for a quarter point, partly because of what I said. There's still quite a lot of what they've already done still to work its way through the system. And we don't think, by the way, that rates will end up going to 6%, as currently is the betting in the markets. We think that would be too much.
Right. When Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, says he's not going to be pushed off course, he is going to stick with the plan, let the Bank of England do what it has to do. Does that mean as far as going towards recession?
Well, it could well be, and we certainly think if rates go up to 6%, as the markets are currently forecasting, and as you see built into those 6% mortgage rates, we think that will produce a recession. When we run it through our numbers, we think that would be a sort of a shallow recession, but definitely a recession, lose about 2% of national output over that recessionary period. So, we think that would be overdoing it, but it is possible if inflation really is sticky, especially in the services sector, people still spending in hotels, profit margins still being pushed up. I think it is possible that we will need a recession to get this inflation out of the system. It's funny, though, if you have it as a target, halving inflation, to then stick with the plan, which is to not do anything and leave it to the Bank of England. It sort of seems like an odd combination.
But should it be their policy, Stephanie, the Bank of England's policy, to almost trigger a recession in order to achieve lower inflation?
I think their policy, their target is only defined in terms of inflation, but they have in the past always weighed those two things. What's the greater harm? I think the feeling is, and that I think I agree with them on this, that over the long term, the greater harm comes from having inflation be built into the system, because in the end, that's going to be more painful for households for a longer period of time.
Stephanie, stay with us if you can for the rest of the discussion. There are calls for Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, to give more support, direct support, to households with mortgages. This is what he had to say in response at the London Stock Exchange.
We know there is enormous pressure for families with mortgages, and it's a really big deal for family finances. But the one thing that would not help those families is to step in with short-term support that meant that inflation stayed higher for longer and those mortgage rates stayed higher for longer. So I'm meeting the mortgage lenders later this week to ask what else can be done to relieve pressure in very difficult times, but we won't do anything that means that high inflation stays around for longer, because that is the root cause of the pressure they're facing.
Do you agree? Do you agree with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt?
Of course I do.
So no support for mortgage holders?
Well, look, no support. The autumn statement confirmed £94 billion worth of help, for families across a wide range of different parts of targeted help. So the idea that not reintroducing mortgage tax relief, which is what I think you're referring to,
well,
which Labour abolished in 2000.
The Conservative MP has also
that would be very untargeted. And and remember, many more people in this country rent than have a mortgage. Now, I think it's...
what's happened to rents?
I think it's unfortunate that for the Labour Party to present this all as Tory failure, which I get why they're doing it, right? And
yes, they're the opposition.
In 2008, when the financial crash happened, when of course it was nothing to do with Gordon Brown and it was all to do with international factors, the Tory government, the Tory opposition then played the same game.
Joe.
I think that it's fairly, to quote the Sun's editorial this morning, I think that's fairly juvenile, and I don't think it helps because Labour may well inherit the crown later on next year. Well, so there is massive help that the government's putting in place, that Jeremy's putting in place. And just finally, Jo, we can't always turn to the government chequebook. No. As I've said on your programme before, the government doesn't have any money. It's always my constituents' money. And we've got into a place where we expect the government... We paid people's wages for the best part of 18 months. We can't now be paying people's mortgages, but there is a lot of help.
Are you calling on the government? Would you, if Labour were in government, be wanting to have direct intervention to help people pay mortgages?
What I'm saying is this is total... No, hang on a minute. What I'm actually saying is this idea, this is a total mismanagement of the economy over 13 years. Why has there been no growth over 13 years? Why have we now got the highest rise in food prices of any of the European...
Because we had a war in Europe, Margaret.
No, it's not. It's in part because of the war in Europe, but it is also because of the trust... No, don't tell me that's progress. We've always said that. It's also because of that appalling mini-budget, and it is also because it's not a question of being pro or anti-Brexit, but you managed Brexit so badly that we've got food inflation, we've got lack of staff shortages. And that is a description of the current situation you're in. You're right, and food inflation is running really, really high, and some of this is domestic inflation. I mean, that's certainly what economists are saying. External factors, yes, but some of it's domestic inflation. I still haven't heard if Labour, if you would advocate for direct help. Well, we're not there at the moment. When we come, we will come in. The Tories have lost their reputation for being good stewards of the economy. We will come in. We will have a terrible situation to overrun. You want me to say to you today what we do? I think the priorities are stability. I've said it to people. Stability, so we don't have these ridiculous budgets like we had under Liz Truss. I think it's growth. We've got to get growth in the economy, and Rachel Reeves has articulated that really well. And then I think we have to tackle the inequality between regions and between families, and that's the way. And on housing, what I would do immediately is introduce better security of tenure for people in the rented housing market, and I would start building homes.
So we have failed to build homes. We've failed and levelling up.
Pardon?
So you want to see stability and growth and levelling up. Well, what political party doesn't
levelling
want?
up, because levelling up is a meaningless concept which hasn't delivered anything.
All right, let me come to Summer and Sunda.
In level down communities don't think it's
Steve is very firmly in support of the government's policy in order to tackle inflation. Leave it to the Bank of England. You say, what's the political price that may be paid in seats like Steve's, where people will feel that pain of interest rates continuing to go up. And they'll blame, as Margaret says, the Conservative government for the direct economic pain they're feeling. Is that going to be the price that's going to be paid by Tory MPs?
I think they're going to have to accept that there is going to be a lot of disconcerted homeowners that are traditionally Conservative voters. I think the problem is that the trade-off here is about inflation. And if inflation gets worse, they're going to be punished by everybody rather than the cohort of mortgage owners. I think the best thing that the Chancellor can hope for is what he's planned already, which is asking banks and mortgage lenders to provide that forbearance and try and get over that short-term pain through this mechanism of getting the banks to be a little bit more generous with their customers, because ultimately direct mortgage support is going to go to bank profits. And if you do that, then it creates a bigger argument for a windfall tax, like Mrs Thatcher advocated on interest rates.
Inflation, which is the best tax cut we could give.
The fuel of inflation.
Jo, you're so...
Why have we got inflation?
Oh, partly because we have a war in Europe, the breadbasket of the world, and they've pushed up energy prices through
and no domestic
the
reasons.
roof. Of course, there are domestic reasons as well. I'm not sitting here pretending that it's nothing to do with us, guys. But you are right. Interest rates were rising before Liz Truss became Prime Minister. You know I wasn't a supporter of Liz Truss. I think it's fairly cheap to just blame it all on Liz Truss and quasi quieting. I get why you do it.
Well, the Bank of England governor did actually say, Andrew Bailey, that he thought the risk premium from the Liz Truss quasi quieting period of time had been reversed to some extent, or in fact wholly. What about Labour pledging more support? Should they be coming out to say they would directly intervene, Sunda?
No, I think there's a political pressure to do that, and I think it's not just the inflation argument about what it does to the economy, it's the fairness argument that you can't ask people who aren't mortgage owners to subsidise it. So all that a government can do, whichever party is, try and use its convening power, its nudging power, see if people get into difficulty, can they be given more stability, more help to fix something, to give people an opportunity. That's I think, the limits to what government can do for mortgage holders themselves. They can't just say, this is an electorally important group, let's subsidise them against something.
And Jeremy is a very effective minister, very experienced minister, and when he sees the banks on Friday, he will be, I know, very persuasive with them about the flexibilities that they can offer around mortgage holidays, around moving people onto interest rate only. And if they're not compliant, then I can tell you now that there will be pressure from the backbenches for them to be encouraged a little bit more.
Coerced or whatever you're saying. Well, let me bring Stephanie. Let me bring Stephanie in at this point. Are these the sorts of options that are legitimately, of course, open to the Chancellor?
I think there were options. I mean, if you compare it to the last time that interest rates were soaring and we had this kind of house price squeeze in the 90s, there was actually a higher proportion of households then who had mortgages, about 40%. Now it's 30%. You've got a higher proportion of people who already own their own homes, many of them possibly Tory voters, so that's probably playing into it. I think the only thing you can realistically do is try and introduce more flexibility at that sort of cliff edge. What other change is that people have fixed rates, which we have previously thought was quite a good thing because it cushioned the impact in the short term of interest rate rises, but then you get these leaps as we're now looking at people down the track of the next year seeing a massive leap in their payments. And I think it's there that you might try and have more of a gradual negotiation with banks, force them to not just push people onto the higher rate immediately, encourage them to be giving the best possible options to households and maybe lifting some of the constraints. Currently, you have to show that someone can afford the higher interest rate. Well, a lot of banks are worried that their existing customers won't be able to go anywhere else because they will fail all those tests because they suddenly can't afford 6%, but they could afford 1.5 or 2, and they will then have people on their books who technically shouldn't have those mortgages. So I think it's that kind of area which is, again, as much regulators as it is government, where you are going to need to put pressure on banks.
Well, we're going to find out, no doubt, after the meeting that Steve has referred to between the Chancellor and the lenders and the banks. I mean, politically, again, Salma, you'll remember the phrase that David Cameron, when he became Prime Minister, wanted to move away from, which is, it has to be hurting to be working. It was John Major in 1995 trying to deal with similar economic problems. Language that I'm sure the Conservatives are going to try not to use in this occasion, even if that is basically what's being advocated.
Well, yes, but this is about that transition. So as Stephanie said, being able to understand where the impact of the rate rises are going to be on inflation further down the line has yet to be realised. And so understanding that there is a time period that they need to get through in order to perhaps realise lower inflation or slower inflation is going to be getting through this pain point. And so the language around it is going to be really critical, because the politics of this and making sure that people are feeling like there is an objective to get to is something that they need to focus on.
I just want to bring it down to, my constituents. I don't know. In my own constituency, there's been a 300% increase in the number of people going to food banks since the start of the pandemic. That's what inflation in food prices is doing to my constituents. As we go through the remortgaging, there are over 10,000 families in my constituency that will be paying £3,000 a year more, and these are not, we're a very we're one of the poorer boroughs, poorer places in the country. They will be paying through. They will lose their homes, and there are things that could be done in relation to all the housing market. We were talking about a little earlier, some about providing greater security of tenure to people in private sector housing. That sort of stuff could happen immediately without any impact. And inflation is not something theoretical. Inflation is really impacting on my constituents' lives and the country.
But what you're talking about in terms of rental tenure is not going to have an impact on people paying mortgages right now.
They may be forced to move into rented accommodation because they can't afford their mortgages. So they may be forced to give up their houses because they can't afford the mortgage, and then we've got to see where they're moving to.
You also have the impact of buy-to-let landlords that sort of boomed over the last 30 years, who are now also cannot afford their mortgages and who are going to sell, which is actually going to reduce a lot of the stock.
Well, maybe what we should do there is enable councils to buy those houses and use them to let to people.
I don't think councils have money to buy that.
Is there an electoral price for you, Steve? I mean, you've been very firm in saying, no, we stick to this, but in your constituency, you haven't got a huge majority. It's going to be difficult for your constituents, isn't it?
Look, I am mostly concerned about my constituents, not about my own neck. We have very high property prices in a place like I represent, and of course people are quite heavily mortgaged up to meet those. And there's what I found interesting about this debate over the last few weeks is that, when Labour made the Bank of England independent, and they obviously stood outside government, but now there's been an awful lot of talk in the papers. 100%, and I still do. And look, the alternative to Jeremy, who I know incredibly well, was very involved in his leadership campaign twice. Didn't go so well, but anyway, got him there in the end. Jeremy will be very careful with his language. He'll be very sensitive about his language, and you would expect that from him, and you would expect that from the Prime Minister. Thank goodness we don't have loose-lipped in Downing Street anymore. So I know that what Jeremy won't do is he won't just lose his head and do things that will make this worse, which is why he's had to be restrained, for instance, area that obviously I look at with the health service, on health service public sector pay. Right, just very briefly before we go and say goodbye to Stephanie Flanders, people talk about a wage price spiral. What is that, and are we in one?
Is that to me?
Yes.
So wage prices, obviously, we had inflation, we had prices grow, and then the question is, if then as in response to that higher inflation, you then match it with wage growth, and the wage growth keeps sort of meeting or even exceeding the inflation, then you're pushing up prices for businesses who are employing those workers. As I said it before, we have seen wage growth, which is one of the factors that you don't see so much in Europe, but you have seen in the US, because we have such a tight labour market, and that's one of those striking things that happened in the pandemic, was a lot of people left the labour market and haven't come back. So I think that's another kind of UK specific factor that has helped to kind of keep upward pressure on wages. But as I said before, there's also been profit margins being pushed up in response to this as part of this inflationary process. So I wouldn't lay it all on the door of the wage price. It's also a profit price spiral as well.
Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg, thank you very much. Let's talk about the COVID inquiry. We've heard evidence from a variety of people, including the former Prime Minister and the former Chancellor. Let's refer to George Osborne. He said this, defending his record in government on austerity in front of the inquiry. I have no doubt that taking those steps to repair the UK's public finances in the years following the financial crisis of 2008-9 had a material and positive effect on the UK's ability to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Steve, is he right?
Of course he's right that we were in a position to help people and pay people's wages for a significant period of time throughout the pandemic. If we hadn't fixed the public finances, we wouldn't have been in a position to do that. And, you know, nobody on the opposition benches was asking for us to spend less supporting. They were asking us to spend more around the self-employed, for instance.
This is during the pandemic.
So
with
George
furlough.
is right about that.
Well,
but then the wider questions, which I suspect you want to come on to, are around the public health, the clinical preparedness for a pandemic.
Right. What did you make of that response, just broadly, from George Osborne?
I think it was helpful to see George Osborne there, because when people think about the COVID inquiry, they're then thinking, let's find out what Boris Johnson did. Should you have closed the schools 1 week earlier? Were you a day late or making that decision about Christmas? But if we're interested in the preparedness, we've got to get much broader there. What was the condition of the health service? What was the preparation like? It's the real challenge then for the COVID inquiry, because it's a massive event that affected everybody, and now it's got to be an inquiry into everything. It's an inquiry into austerity and its impact on health services and preparedness. So boiling all of that down is challenging. I mean, obviously everyone's going to defend the specific decisions they made. The inquiry's got to sort of take a helicopter view above that. For lessons for next time is what we're about, not a sort of history of the last 20 years.
But do you accept his verdict that he got the UK's public finances in shape following the financial crisis, and that made us better prepared?
I think the broader verdict on austerity we'll have to see historically there, but I think the health service pressures matter to the pandemic. I mean, Brexit is partly a result of the politics of austerity. I think there's something like a pandemic. It's like the Second World War, where if you're going to tell people they can't go to work, of course you need to do furloughing, and you're going to take on exceptional debts, which aren't really about the sustainability of a country sustaining its debts in normal times. So I think pandemic debt is sort of war debt, and so I think it's less closely connected than he claims here.
Salma?
Well, yes, I agree with that, except for the fact that being able to borrow at certain rates, and now that we're seeing kind of global borrowing rates going up as well, I think getting the public finances just as a base, whatever may come, is an important thing to do. I think this is a really, really important inquiry, as Sunda said, because it's not about the specifics of what happened in one core bit. It is about looking at the decisions that led up to it. So it's very important that we ask ourselves these questions and take that wider view. I think that ultimately, you know, Baroness Hallett and her team are going to have to give us a verdict on that, having gone through all the details, and not just about the austerity policy coming out from number 11, but also how that was applied in very complex structures like the NHS, and how those decisions were then taken by experts about how they were going to make the choices of what they were going to focus their preparedness on.
Margaret?
Well, let me just say, I do agree that it is important that both of them have said, Salma and Sunda have said, that we think about lockdown and its impact, and we've today got this.
We'll come on to that.
We've today got this report about the growth in eating disorders among young girls. But on the, I've got to disagree. Sorry, I'm not doing this really. It sounds terribly partisan, but I don't mean it in that terrible partisan way. We went into the pandemic with the NHS in a terrible state. Fewer doctors, fewer nurses, fewer beds than all our European countries. 4 million people on the waiting list. And if you look, the Health Foundation is a bit of Health Foundation research, which I hope you're familiar with. If we were spending at the same rate as all our European partners on health, we would, over that period from 2010 to 2019, be spending £40 billion more on the NHS. To say that austerity didn't have an impact is just wrong. And then the final thing, Jo, I know you want to shut me up, but the final thing is on social care. You know, we said we had Matt Hancock saying that he was going to put a protective ring around care homes, and the austerity had an impact of that. And again, if I go to my own constituency, in those early days of when we were looking for PPE equipment, our care homes were going to schools to pick up the goggles that kids were using in science lessons, to use them as protective. Our care homes, they couldn't go out and get food for their people because of the constraints on
let's
people.
pick up on your comments on the sort of health of the nation. I mean, Steve, you were a health minister. You've seen the submissions from your friend Jeremy Hunt from that time. isn't he right that those concerns that he had then, that he submitted to the inquiry, are in fact the truth of what happened? Whatever George Osborne says about the economics, bringing down the deficit, when it came to health, yes, spending increased on the NHS in those years, but at a much slower rate.
Absolutely true. You can't argue with the facts, right? So we did protect health spending and increase it, but at a smaller rate. Now, maybe if Gordon Truss hadn't crashed the economy before 2010, maybe we'd been able to increase it more.
I just can't get.
You have to let it go.
Steve, you can't say they crashed the economy. It was a global financial crisis. But let's move on.
So there's no global factors now.
We didn't protect health spending. We didn't protect health spending.
I was a health minister and I was a public health minister. One of the reasons why we fared badly in the pandemic is because we are unhealthy as a nation. We are too big. A child obesity.
It's people's fault.
The child obesity plan that I wrote, a lot of that was not implemented, and I think government
still hasn't.
And it still hasn't been. I have been very publicly critical of the chair of the health committee.
Conservative
that we should have implemented some of the policies around the obesity programme, for instance. But the select committee, actually under Jeremy's chairmanship, and I'm sort of following up on it now, has already done a coronavirus inquiry called Lessons Learned to Date. And one of the things that the government have done is they split out Public Health England into UK Health Security Agency. So I think people sometimes think that the inquiry is going to take years and it won't be until then that we learn anything.
Yes.
Actually, no. I think some of that that learning has already been implemented.
And have you learnt from that actually the NHS wasn't in as good a shape as it could have been when we went into the pandemic?
I don't think the NHS was in as good a shape as it could have been, yes. But I think there are also wider public health factors which we, over generations and governments, we have not done enough to make a healthier nation that was therefore more robust when it faced
and on the economics, on what George Osborne said, Margaret, do you agree, though, that because of the way they tackled the deficit, he made it his core mission, rightly or wrongly, it meant the UK could afford furlough? In the generous way it did.
No, do you know,
No,
let me just say, I think history is going to actually say that Gordon Brown tackled the global crisis really well and stopped it being as bad as it could have been. And George Osborne's austerity created such damage to our economy, to our well-being, to division in our society, that it was a really bad policy. So I actually take it completely.
Right.
And then
I'm not going to go back to the Liam Byrne. No. Let me just show Sunda and Salma this headline in the Daily Telegraph. Margaret referenced it. Lockdown damaged a generation, says former Chief Medical Officer. It's Dame Sally Davis. She was emotional. She told the COVID inquiry children are still suffering from the effects of national shutdowns. And I think you were referencing the rise in eating disorders. Do you think we're going to get to a point where there is a consensus that lockdowns weren't worth it?
I think we are now getting to a point where we are challenging lockdowns in a much more sort of rational way. And, I was a former school governor of a primary school, and we were already seeing the impacts, a year on about for children and how they socialised and what an impact that had had. So this is not surprising to me in terms of the way people are being damaged, mentally. I think that if we are going to sort of learn anything from this, and let's just take it a step back from party political discussions that we're having over there. What is interesting is how all governments make decisions and how they actually go through that process, and this is really important to expose actually how are those decisions made and in what context and what kind of expertise is available. We were in an emergency situation. Everybody wanted to go to lockdown because they felt that this is the cleanest, quickest way of getting out of a pandemic. However, the trade-off was not clear. And I think this is really important for us to be able to make future decisions around pandemic planning.
95-97% of us thought we had to do lockdowns. None of us wanted to. None of us liked it. I think we might have known at the time. We know in hindsight we should have treated people differently when they were dying and when there were funerals. We could have had more leeway there. That was unnecessary. And closing schools should always have been a last resort, and it was a last resort. And there are long-term damages. But in the end, I think the costs of lockdown are partly the costs of having a pandemic that we had to get out of. So I'm sure there are lessons to learn about what to do about it, but I think you can rewrite history too far.
Obviously, but we had a novel coronavirus which we didn't know what it was, and we didn't know how to treat it.
But you were a sceptic of further lockdowns,
subsequent,
weren't you?
yes.
Yes, I'm not talking about the first one really, but the subsequent ones.
Yeah, because I think I don't think the case was made in the House well enough by my minister ministers at the time, and I was very vocal on this programme about that. And, you know, in my personal life as well as in my constituency, you know, I'm seeing the mental health crisis among our children. You know, my wife works in early years, and, you know, she's seen the children come through who've had no socialisation. Children learn through play, and they're getting to preschool, but a couple of years ago, and they hadn't had any socialisation, and that is going to have long-term impacts. And, you know, the eating disorders that you rightly refer to, which we see as constituency MP cases, you know, the impact of this, I'm sorry to say, I think the impact of the pandemic, financially and socially, there is still as much to come as we've seen.
But on lockdowns, I mean, it was. I mean, of course, it's impossible, isn't it?
Yeah.
We didn't know then what we know now. But listening, lockdown damaged a generation. It's quite an indictment on young people.
The tragedy, I mean, I'm sorry to say, the tragedy was that it did damage a generation.
Definitely.
And I think, you know, particularly the children in school. And actually, I chair a university now, and we've got people there who are now facing disruption because of the industrial action in universities, who were locked down, who didn't do their GCSEs, who didn't do their A-levels. So you can go right the way through. I think one of the things that I'm afraid the government got wrong was they said they would invest both in mental health services and in support for children in schools after lockdown to try and deal with some of the trauma that particularly kids and the younger generation did. They didn't do that. And it's really, if you look now at mental health services, and particularly for kids, right the way through the education system, it's really tragic that they can't access the support they need, which would enable them to have the life chances they deserve.
I don't want to frighten people. You know, I met with Claire MacDonald, who runs Children's Health Services at NHS England just last week. We are ahead of schedule in terms of putting those mental health workers into schools, and that's a very good thing because the anxiety time bomb is ticking in schools, and we are seeing it now with our young people. So there is support there, but, you know, there is huge waiting list for formal CAM services, undoubtedly. But it's the low-level anxiety and mental health challenges that I'm seeing.
We've got Prime Minister's questions coming up in about 7 or 8 minutes' time. Let's talk about your book, the one you've just written, How to Be a Patriot, Why Love of Country Can End Our Very British Culture War. Why do you think being a patriot is a unifying, or all of us being more patriotic will be unifying?
Well, it sounds counterintuitive. Everyone in politics knows that identity can divide us, whether it's Brexit, Scotland, you know, wokeness, culture wars on every front. I'm saying as it gets more difficult, actually, we've got to work harder at getting it right. It won't be enough to say, let's avoid those issues. We all love the NHS, don't we? We've actually got to work on those issues, look for the forms of patriotism that can say that the political divides might be really important, might be really big issues. They don't define us as a country. And it will help to have politicians who want to do that, but we can all make our own contribution.
So love of country, how would that be demonstrated?
Well, I think it's how you feel it. I don't want to tell anybody how to be patriotic if they don't, you know, I don't want them to perform at the last night's performance they don't feel like. It's a very personal book as well. I grew up, you know, went to school in the 70s and 80s, you know, but dad from India, mum from Ireland. I felt Britain get easier for people like me in terms of the overt racism I saw at football, the opening up of public life. I mean, I left university, there'd never been a black or Asian government minister in this country. And so change can happen very, very quickly. Younger people don't believe that story. They haven't felt a sense of progress in these more polarised times. So I'd like us to get back on track, really, about a country that can disagree about things and make progress. And we haven't been doing that very well.
You feel very confident, you sound very confident about it. I mean, is it, without being rude, an age thing as well, a little bit?
It's a generational thing, because I was part of a generation that saw an advance. I think younger people have got higher expectations. They're like saying to me, Sunday, people aren't throwing bananas. You set a very low bar there. You know, we want to progress in our time. It's the 75th anniversary of Windrush this week. You know, enormous progress across those generations. But young people are saying we haven't got fairness and equality yet. Can we have debate about substantive causes, not trivia, where we make constructive progress instead of just always arguing about language or, you know, the people we don't like, that we don't talk to? We've got to find meaningful contact about these big, potentially divisive issues.
You're nodding there. Do we need to be more patriotic?
Well, as a Conservative, I think, you know, I'm all for a bit of flag waving. And actually, I've got to say, you know, I've spoken to Sundar about these issues for years. And when I was in the Communities Department, we were working on an integration green paper. I didn't quite get to announce it or put it out. But I think what's really interesting about what Sundar's saying is that, you know, patriotism doesn't have to be at these two sort of ends, which is either really jingoistic or incredibly sort of embarrassing and ironic. And there is this middle ground. And like him, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and there has been a huge amount of progress. Yes, there's still more to do. But a point of pride is, we have, the Conservative Party has delivered an ethnic minority Prime Minister and great officers of state that BAME. And that's a great point of pride for me.
Right. Do you think it's important politically for politicians to state it? We use the examples in the headlines there of both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, or should it be less about telling and just more about feeling it?
I think it's important to state it. Can I just... Personally, I'm probably the only one that wasn't born in Britain here, around the table today. So I'm an immigrant, and my parents had to flee 2 countries for persecution or fear of persecution. And my dad, throughout his life, was always grateful to Britain for welcoming us as immigrants and allowing us to become British. We came here as stateless. But the other thing I wanted to say, Jo, is I fought the BMP in 2010. It's some time ago now. But the right tried to capture the concept of patriotism to create division and hatred. And I think it's really important. I don't think it's a Conservative issue. I think it's a cross-party issue. I think, actually, I hope we agree on this one here today. I think we should all actually capture patriotism with diversity and recognising our history as a force for creating social cohesion. And we should celebrate 75 years of the NHS. We should celebrate the coronation, all those things that bring us together. So I see patriotism as a way of embedding social cohesion. Not
has the left. I mean, do you think the left has had a problem with being overt about it or being explicit about it?
Well, I think under Jeremy Corbyn we'd never have done it, but thank God we've got rid of him. And I think under Keir Starmer I genuinely think I did it in Barking, and I do it in Barking today. And I think it's a way in which you bring people together. We're more than our individual. It's what unites us, and so patriotism is a good thing.
Can it be dangerous in language terms, not patriotism, but the way sometimes policies like the illegal migration bill, the language used around the small boats issue, where people are saying these things are Suella Braverman, saying they're at odds with British values. Is that a way where patriotism can sound as if it is trying to be divisive?
Yeah, it can do. I mean, as we said earlier, language and how you deploy it matters in politics, and it matters whether people identify with the body that we sit in. I mean, look at the backdrop behind you. The Union Jack is flying above the great buildings of government today and every day, and rightly so. I mean, I represent Winchester, former capital of England, a very patriotic place, and what an outpouring of patriotism we saw in recent months with loss of our late Queen, and then of course the coronation of the King. And I think that institution is a really great part of our country, and that brings us together.
But
whether you are, whichever way you sit on the political spectrum, or even if you're a royalist or not, you can see that you can respect that institution.
Well, I was going to say, because do you have to subscribe to all the sort of classic, if you like, institutions in order to be a patriot?
It's a liberal democracy, so you can be patriotic and want your country to change. You can be patriotic and think it would be better if it was a republic, but if you can't persuade most people, you won't get there. So every party has to find its own way. I mean, the left has been successful not very often in this country. When it's been successful, it was its most patriotic and its most successful in 1945, because it was coming out of a wartime experience. It had an argument about patriotism and identity in the 60s, in the 1990s. So nobody's ever governed a country without feeling at ease with its symbols. That's a challenge for the left, or at ease with the country it wants to govern. And if the right starts...
Blair was a good example of that, wasn't it?
But if the right starts preferring the Britain of 70 years ago to the Britain of today, it won't be successful.
If you want to govern a country, but you're telling the country that it's rubbish, don't be surprised if they don't vote for you.
Well, let's just show you inside the House of Commons chamber. Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker looking up because Rishi Sunak, he's there. He was notably absent, wasn't he, Steve, on Monday night for the Privileges Committee report. Should he have been there?
It's a matter for him as the Member of Parliament for Richmond, North Yorkshire. It was a matter for the House of Commons. I was there representing the people of Winchester, and I get it. Some of them would have taken a different view to me, but my view was that we had to support the Privileges Committee because it was about supporting the House and about supporting democracy.
Should he state his view on that report today? Because the vote's gone through. It was overwhelmingly in supportive of the findings. Should he now, from a leadership perspective, as Prime Minister...
I don't tell him what he should do. If he's
I know you do, but
if he's
would you
asked
like
the question today, and I think Keir Starmer will be bonkers to go back to that today, then he'll have an opportunity, and in a couple of minutes you'll find out.
Yeah, indeed he will. Should he ask Keir Starmer, would you like to hear Rishi Sunak say anything, or is it gone?
I would like to hear Rishi Sunak, and I agree with Steve. I think the vote on Monday was about more than the Privileges Committee. It was about defence of Parliament, and it was defence of democracy.
All right.
I think Rishi should give us leadership on that.
Well, let's hear.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I opened the Ukraine Recovery Conference alongside President Zelensky. The aim of the conference is to secure a resilient economic future for Ukraine. And as we mark the 75th anniversary of the arrival of the Empire Windrush tomorrow, I'm sure the whole House will celebrate the contribution of the Windrush generation who have done so much to build the Britain that we cherish today. And, Mr. Speaker, this Armed Forces Week, we thank them for all they do to keep our country safe. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As inflation continues to outstrip pay awards, and tomorrow we expect to see the 13th consecutive rise in interest rates, will the Prime Minister tell the House by how much living standards have fallen during his 8 months in office?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've always been very clear. Inflation is putting pressure on family budgets, and that's why the UK government has taken decisive action to support families through this difficult time, including households in Scotland who are receiving considerable support, not just with their energy bills, but also the most vulnerable as well.
Mark Benji.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we have got a proud record of supporting the nuclear industry, which is an essential part of achieving secure, low-carbon energy. I'm delighted that my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has given us backing to the next generation of nuclear reactors, including SMR and larger projects, and ask that he now commits to seeing the fuel for these projects manufactured in the UK. This will secure long-term high-skilled employment at key sites in the North West, like Springfields in my constituency, and a supply chain across the UK.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are preserving and strengthening the UK's nuclear fuel production capacity through our £75 million nuclear fuel fund. I know that Springfield Fuels in my honourable friend's constituency has benefited from £30 million of funding. And he's right to say that our domestic nuclear fuel sector has a critical role to play in supporting the UK's energy security and independence, and I know that he will continue to be a champion for the industry in this House.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about the Windrush generation who've contributed so much to our country and to the armed forces in this week and all weeks? And Glenda Jackson's passing leaves a space in our cultural and political life that can never be filled. She played many roles with great distinction, passion and commitment. Academy Award-winning actor, campaigning Labour MP and an effective government minister. We will never see talent like hers again. Mr. Speaker, one of the Prime Minister's own MPs says Britain is facing a mortgage catastrophe. Does he agree with her?
Mr. Speaker, can I start by joining the honourable gentleman in his tribute to Glenda Jackson? And, Mr. Speaker, it's also right that we do support those with the mortgages, and this is why the absolute right economic priority is to halve inflation. Because inflation is what is driving interest rates up, inflation is what erodes people's savings and pushes up prices and ultimately makes them poorer. Now, this is why, a long time before I had this job, I highlighted the importance of tackling inflation. It's why that I said it is never easy to root out inflation, but we will take the difficult and responsible decisions to do so. It's an approach that the IMF has strongly endorsed in their words, and describing our actions as decisive and responsible.
Mr. Speaker, I realise the Prime Minister spent all week saying he doesn't want to influence anyone or anything. He's certainly keeping to that with his answer. He knows very well the cause of the mortgage catastrophe. 13 years of economic failure and a Tory kamikaze budget which crashed the economy and put mortgages through the roof. So will the Prime Minister tell us how much the Tory mortgage penalty is going to cost the average homeowner?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as ever, the honourable gentleman isn't aware of the global macroeconomic situation. But let me do. But substantively, let me tell him and the House what we are doing to support those with mortgages. We have deliberately and proactively increased the generosity of our support for the mortgage interest scheme. We've also established a new FCA communal duty which will protect people with mortgages, for example, moving them onto interest-only mortgages or lengthening mortgage terms. And we have spent tens of billions of pounds supporting people with the cost of living, particularly the most vulnerable. But that is the difference between us, Mr. Speaker. While he is always focused on the politics, we are actually just getting on and doing the job.
Let's test that, because the question he refuses to answer, he actually knows the answer to this question, is £2,900 extra. That's the cost to the average family of the Tory mortgage penalty. Now, he was warned by experts about this as long ago as autumn last year, but he either didn't get it, didn't believe it, or didn't care, because he certainly didn't do anything. And when I raised this a couple of months ago, he had the gall to stand at that dispatch box and say he was delivering for homeowners. How is an extra £2,900 a year on repayment delivering for homeowners?
Well, so, Mr. Speaker, now let's just look at the facts. Let's look at the facts, because he talks about interest rates. Perhaps the honourable gentleman could explain why interest rates are at similar levels in the United States, in Canada, in Australia and New Zealand, why they're at the highest level in Europe that they've been for 2 decades, Mr. Speaker. That's why it's important that we have a plan to reduce inflation. But in contrast, what do we hear from the honourable gentleman? He wants to borrow an extra £28 billion a year. That would make the situation worse. He wants to ban new supplies of energy from the North Sea. That would make the situation worse. And he wants to give in to unions' unaffordable pay demands. That would make the situation worse. Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have many policies, but the few that he does have all have the same thing in common. They're dangerous, inflationary, and working people would pay the price.
Seriously? Sorry? I don't think we need any more, do we? No. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Prime Minister has a keen interest in the mortgage market in California, but I'm talking about mortgage holders here. And whilst his government is consumed in law-breaking, chaos and division, working people are paying the price. This morning, I spoke to James in Selby. He's a police officer, working hard to keep people safe every day. The Tory mortgage penalty is going to cost him and his family £400 more each and every month. That's nearly £5,000. He told me this morning, they may not want to hear this, he told me this morning that they've decided to sell their house, to downsize, and he's just told his children they're going to have to start sharing bedrooms. Why should James and his family pay the cost of the Prime Minister's failure?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope when the honourable gentleman was talking to James, he explained that his economic policies would make James's situation worse, Mr. Speaker. And it's not just me saying that, Mr. Speaker. The Independent Institute of Fiscal Studies says his policy of never-ending debt and borrowing would damage James because it would increase inflation and drive up interest rates, leaving James and everybody else in this country poorer, Mr. Speaker. The IMF has said that our plan prioritises not what is politically easy, but what is right for the British people. That is what responsible economic leadership looks like, Mr. Speaker.
James and his family will have been listening to that Prime Minister. And their plight should keep them awake at night, because over the next few years, 7.5 million people are going to be in the same boat, all paying the Tory mortgage penalty, month after month after month. The situation is so dire that repossessions are already up 50%, a total betrayal of the idea that if you work hard, you'll get on. So what's the Prime Minister going to do to make sure more families don't lose their homes?
Mr. Speaker, I know he's reading from his prepared script, but he failed to actually listen to the answer that I gave. Well, I did actually spell out in detail what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. We've increased the generosity of support for mortgage interest scheme. We did that proactively in advance. We've also established a new FCA consumer duty that will protect borrowers, for example, by allowing them to extend their mortgage terms or switch to interest-only mortgages. And we have spent tens of billions of pounds supporting households with living costs. Those are the practical steps that we are taking to help James and other families who are facing these situations. But what I would say, because he mentioned mortgage arrears and repossessions, I am pleased to say, Mr. Speaker, they are actually running at a level today that is below when we entered the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, because of the actions that we're taking. But more importantly than that, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, is that they are also running 3 times lower than the level we inherited from the last Labour government.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure from the vantage point of his helicopter, everything might look fine. But that's not the lived experience of those on the ground. After 13 years of economic failure across the country, people are paying the price of uncosted, reckless, damaging decisions by the Tory party. And even now, as mortgages go through the roof, the Prime Minister is planning to wave through honours and peerages for those who cause misery for millions. What does it say about this government that while working people are worrying about mortgage hike, paying the bills, even repossessions, the Tory party is rewarding those guilty of economic vandalism?
Mr. Speaker, no amount of personal attacks and petty point scoring can disguise the fact that the honourable gentleman does not have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. He comes here every week to make the same petty points. We are getting on and delivering for this country. Yes, Mr. Speaker, inflation is a challenge. That's why we are on track to keep reducing it. We are reducing waiting lists. We are stopping the boats, all while he is focused on the past, focused on the politics. It's all talk, whereas from this government and from this Prime Minister, we deliver for the country.
Philip, I know you're popular. Come on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents continue to be concerned about energy prices and energy security. Will the Prime Minister assure me that he will not cave in to the extremist bullies from Just Stop Oil and their patsies on the Labour leadership, as well, and instead commit to developing new oil and gas production in the United Kingdom, which will be good for jobs, good for the economy, and make us less dependent on foreign countries for our energy supply?
Well, as ever, my honourable friend makes an excellent point. Putin's weaponisation of energy has amplified the need for greater energy security, and that's why we deliberately have launched new licensing rounds for the North Sea. Official forecasts suggest that a block on North Sea oil and gas investment would mean that the UK's dependence on imports would rise substantially. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party's decision is one that puts ideology ahead of jobs, investment and Britain's energy security.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, in February, the Prime Minister told this here House that borrowing costs are back to where they should be. In March, he boasted we are on track to halve inflation by the end of the year. And in May, he then said economic optimism is increasing. Well, given the dire economic reality of today, is it not now clear that he's taken his honesty lessons from Boris Johnson?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman also failed to mention that not just the Bank of England, not just the OBR, not just the OECD, but also the IMF, all of them have upgraded their growth outlook for the United Kingdom economy this year. Whilst he and others were predicting that this country would enter a recession, the actions of this government have meant that we have so far averted that, and we continue to be on track to keep reducing inflation because that is the right economic priority.
Can I just say, I want people to be a little bit more cautious on what they say. This is the present serving Prime Minister. The danger will it could be misled in the way that it was put. Stephen Flynn.
But, Mr. Speaker, listening to the Prime Minister's answer, I don't think he quite grasps the reality of the economic situation facing households across these isles. But how could he? But it doesn't need to be like this. It didn't need to be like this. Because mortgage deals in Ireland, they're not sitting in excess of 6%, they're around about 4.5%. Inflation in the euro area, that's not sitting at 8.7%, it's sitting at closer to 6%. Britain is broke. Now, 7 years after their EU referendum, will he finally admit that it was Brexit that broke it?
Mr. Speaker, again, I don't think the honourable gentleman was paying attention earlier. Interest rates in this country are at similar levels to they are in America, in Canada, in Australia and in New Zealand, Mr. Speaker. The rise in inflation and interest rates is a global phenomenon, but that's why early I set out that it was the right economic priority to have to bring inflation down. That's what this government would do. But that requires, Mr. Speaker, that requires difficult and responsible decisions. That's what leadership looks like. I don't think the SNP will ever do the same thing.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wilver, in my constituency of Unismore, is recognised as the best site for small modular reactors and large-scale new nuclear in the UK. Given the UK government's commitment to nuclear and Wilver, when can my Unismore constituents expect to hear the result of Great British Nuclear's small modular reactor competition? Diolch yn fawr.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there'll be no greater champion for this technology and her community than my honourable friend. My understanding is that the first stage of market engagement is already underway. The expectation is that the down selection process will be launched this summer with an ambition to assess and decide on the leading technologies this autumn. The competition will be open, judicious, fair and robust, and I express all my confidence that we will select the best technology for the United Kingdom.
Anxious welcoming it. Right, Stephen Furry.
4 months after the very welcome Windsor Framework, there is still no restored Northern Ireland Executive or Assembly, and we are facing an unprecedented budget crisis. This situation is untenable. It's getting worse every day, and the government approach seems to be to wait to see if something happens rather than leading from the front. So can the Prime Minister confirm that he's willing to work with the Northern Ireland parties on a financial package for a restored executive, and also will he work more closely with the Irish Government to try to drive a process, including putting reform with institutions on the agenda, so that those who want to govern Northern Ireland can do so?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his engagement with me and the government during this process. I share his frustration, and our focus remains on delivering for the people of Northern Ireland, who expect and deserve their locally elected decision makers to address the issues that matter to them most. I thank him for his kind words about the Windsor Framework and how it allows us to move forward. And for many years we have recognised the challenges particularly facing Northern Ireland, and that's why we've provided over £7 billion of funding on top of the Barnett Block grant since 2014. I can assure him that my right honourable friend, the Northern Ireland Secretary, remains in close contact with all the parties in Northern Ireland to clarify what more is needed so that we can restore the conditions for executive formation.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2016, cumulative growth in Italy has been 4%, in Germany has been 5.5%, in the UK has been 6.8%. In May last year, British exports to the European Union were not just the highest since Brexit, but since records began. The UK had the highest growth of any G7 country in both 2021 and 2022. The Eurozone is currently in recession. We are not. Is it not time we heard more good news talking Britain up?
Well, my right honourable friend is quite right to highlight the improvement in our economic outlook, and he's right to highlight the good positive news showing the strength in the underlying economy. And I know that he joins with me in saying that our economic priority right now must be to continue to bear down on inflation. But while we do that, we are putting the conditions in place to grow this economy. And as he said, unlike the party opposite, we won't talk Britain down, we will grow the country's jobs.
Thank you much, Mr Speaker. Last night was another fantastic night at Hampden, a real tonic during tough times for Tartan Army and Scotland more widely. However, whilst English and Welsh fans could watch their national teams for free on Channel 4 and S4C, only a small fraction of Scots could watch the match, with many unable to afford a subscription to Viaplay, particularly during this cost of living crisis. So, does he agree with me that this is inherently unfair? And will he ask the DCMS Secretary to meet with me to discuss how we fix this situation?
Well, can I join with my honourable friend in his comments about the match and let him know that I know the Culture Secretary is engaging with him and others on this particular topic, and I'll make sure that she gets back to him.
Anne-Marie Morris.
Speaker, in December last year, Link conducted some research on cash acceptance. Their research found that nearly half, 45% of people, have been somewhere where cash has not been accepted or has been discouraged, and 49% said being unable or being discouraged to pay in cash was inconvenient. Will the Prime Minister look again at the Financial Services and Markets Bill when it comes back from the other place and ensure that any entity providing a public service directly to the public and involving payments or a charge must accept cash?
Well, Mr Speaker, we know that cash continues to be used by millions of people, particularly those in vulnerable groups, and that's why the Financial Service and Markets Bill will, for the first ever time, protect people's access to cash in UK law. The bill also supports businesses to continue to accept cash by ensuring reasonable access to deposit facilities. But as technology and consumer behaviour changes, it is right that organisations themselves should be able to choose the forms of payment that they will accept.
Thank
you, Mr Speaker. Does the Prime Minister believe that the reward for being a lawbreaker should be to be made a lawmaker?
Mr Speaker, there is, as we discussed last week, a well-established process of vetting for all peerages, and in keeping with the convention followed by Prime Ministers of both parties, have followed the same process.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Wiltshire leads the world in agri-tech, the farming increases in productivity that are going to feed the world's growing population without wrecking the environment. I welcome what the government has done in this space, particularly in gene editing, only possible because of Brexit, of course. Will my right honourable friend acknowledge the work of Wiltshire farmers and tech entrepreneurs, particularly James Dyson, but there are many more? Does he agree with me this is one of the key opportunities for our country to become a high-wage, high-skill, high-tech economy?
Mr Speaker, when it comes to agri-tech, we are among the best in the world, with fantastic research bodies, businesses and pioneering farmers and growers, and I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to all of them. They're getting our support with £270 million farming innovation programme, and, as he rightly mentioned, we are seizing the opportunities from our exit from the EU, including through our plans to more quickly develop gene-edited crops that are resistant to drought and flooding, that will drive up growth, productivity and create jobs.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So just to recap, during this Parliament we've had one Tory Prime Minister who turned out to be a proven liar, a second Tory Prime Minister who was outlasted by a lettuce. After this week's pathetic no-show by the Prime Minister, what one word would he use to describe himself? Might it be weak?
Mr Speaker, what's weak is the party opposite being unable to stand up, to stand up to the people who fund them and stand behind hard-working families in this country.
Mr Speaker, I welcome the steps the Prime Minister is taking to stop illegal, dangerous and unnecessary small boat crossings, which are overwhelming our asylum system. But I have to raise significant concerns about a recent decision to stand up a third hotel in Burton, as well as increase capacity at another hotel by 64%. This is going to have a serious knock-on effect for our response to homelessness and rough sleeping, as well as causing challenges for wider public services in East Staffordshire. What further support can the Prime Minister provide local authorities in East Staffordshire to deal with these urgent concerns?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is why we need to stop the boat so that we can relieve the unsustainable pressure on our asylum system and accommodation services, which is costing British taxpayers over £3 billion a year. Our new bill will ensure that anyone arriving illegally will be detained and swiftly removed. But in the meantime, we will take action to address the unacceptable costs of housing migrants in hotels. We recognise the pressure this places on local areas. That's why central government is providing further dispersal financial support, but I will ensure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the Immigration Minister to discuss her specific local concerns further.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Imperial NHS Trust described the government's recent decision to delay the rebuilding of Charing Cross, Hammersmith and St Mary's hospitals as hugely damaging for the health and healthcare of hundreds of thousands of people. Will the Prime Minister keep the promise made to me by his predecessor 1 year ago from that dispatch box and guarantee completion of new hospitals on these sites by 2030?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government remains committed to 2 new hospital schemes for Imperial College Healthcare Trust at Hammersmith Hospital and Charing Cross Hospital, and for St Mary's Hospital as part of the new hospital programme. We've expanded the programme, as the honourable gentleman knows, to include buildings with RAC, and we need to address those as a priority for the safety of staff and patients. However, we still expect the majority of schemes in Cohort 4 to be in construction before 2030, and I know that the department will continue to keep him updated on progress.
David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom sanctioned Iran for promoting terrorism, for destabilising the Middle East, for supplying weapons to our enemies, and, of course, the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Within the past few weeks, the journalist David Rose has reported in the Jewish Chronicle that British universities have been undertaking research in collaboration with Iranian researchers and universities into areas of potential military applications, including drone technology, fighter jets, battlefield armour, and laser communication. Will the Prime Minister initiate an investigation into this and take action to stop the failure of our sanctions regime before it does any more harm to the national interest of the United Kingdom and our allies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for raising this important topic. We take all allegations of breaches of export control seriously, and my understanding is that officials in the Department for Business and Trade are currently now investigating the allegations made in the recent press articles cited. We will not accept collaborations which compromise our national security, and that's why we've made our systems more robust, including expanding the scope of the Academic Technology Approval Scheme to protect UK research from ever-changing global threats. But my right honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this, and he has my assurance we will keep on it.
David McKay.
Could any of the material the Prime Minister's government is trying to avoid giving to the COVID inquiry cover his tenure as Chancellor and his eat out to help out policy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said before, I think it is right that we learn the lessons from COVID, and that's why, so that we can be better prepared for the future, and that's why the government has cooperated in a spirit of transparency and candour with the inquiry, handing over more than 55,000 documents so far, Mr. Speaker. That there is a very specific point of disagreement. As the honourable gentleman well knows, it is the subject now of legal proceedings, so I'm not able to comment further.
Greg Smith.
Mr. Speaker, despite being world leaders in motorsport, the UK has not hosted a round of the World Rally Championship since 2019. We now have an opportunity to host a round in Northern Ireland next year to bring in excess of £100 million to the economy. But to make that happen, the promoters need government underwriting of approximately £1 million. So will my right honourable friend the Prime Minister agree with me that this event simply must go ahead and instruct the relevant departments to work with the APPG for motorsport, Motorsport UK and the promoters to make it happen?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Northern Ireland is a fantastic place to host international events, and I'm delighted that my honourable friend shares my enthusiasm for driving forward prosperity in Northern Ireland. And with tourism, though, being devolved in Northern Ireland, I suggest he engages with Tourism NI on this potential event, and I look forward to hearing how he gets on.
Mr. Speaker, the UK government and His Majesty's loyal opposition refuse to face up to the bleak realities. Brexit is causing weaker growth and a soaring inflation, according to the former governor of the Bank of England. The LSE says EU trade barriers have added an average £250 to household food bills, and Scots fishing chiefs are saying they were sold down the river and scoff at the talk of treaty renegotiation as just spin. With such colossal failures stacking up, and the former PM, who played a leading role in the Leave camp, finally exposed as a serial liar, will the current PM apologise to my constituents in Edinburgh North and Leith?
Mr. Speaker, I'll just point out to the honourable lady, because she's going on about the EU and us leaving it. We have actually grown faster than France and Italy since we left the single market, Mr. Speaker. Our exports have also grown by 25% just since COVID, and as we heard from our honourable friend earlier, that every single international organisation has upgraded their forecast for UK economic growth. That's because we've got the right priorities to drive growth, create jobs and spread opportunity in every part of our United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hospices across the UK provide quality but also compassionate care to people at the end of their lives, such as Mountbatten Hospice in my constituency, who looked after my office manager Sue Hall when she passed away in March. That's why I and her son-in-law, Miles Rogers, will be skydiving to raise money on Saturday, and we've raised £6,000 so far. The Prime Minister should feel free to donate to the campaign, and will really send his best wishes to all hospice workers across the United Kingdom.
Well, can I join with my honourable friend in first of all wishing, I think it was Miles, good luck this weekend as he raises money, but also join him in paying tribute to all our incredible hospice volunteers and workers across the country. They do a fantastic job in all our constituencies at a very difficult time for families' lives, and we all owe them an enormous amount of thanks.
Tim Farrell.
Half of us, sadly, will get cancer at some point during our lives. And half of those with cancer will need radiotherapy treatment. Yet 3.5 million people in this country live in radiotherapy deserts where they don't have close access to the treatment, including my constituency, where my patients living in Westmoreland have to travel 3-hour round trips every day to get life-saving treatment. So would the Prime Minister back our proposal for a satellite radiotherapy unit at Westmoreland General Hospital in Kendal, and also help support all the other members living in the radiotherapy deserts to bring radiotherapy close to their communities too?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know, like the honourable gentleman, that access to healthcare in rural areas is particularly important given the distances that our rural constituents have to drive. That's why we remain committed to expanding the range of diagnostic services that are available through our proposal to roll out community diagnostic centres. And I think the record-breaking capital budget that we have in the NHS at the moment is delivering that, and I look forward to the department engaging with him on his plans for his local area.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Bank of England are raising interest rates to try to stem spending and therefore preventing inflation being baked into the economy, the same can't be said for those with savings accounts. Would it not be good for people to be encouraged and incentivised to save more? And would my right honourable friend and the Chancellor talk to the industry and encourage them or impel them to actually give a good deal to savers too?
Can I thank my honourable friend, because she raises an excellent point. It is vitally important that savers are treated fairly and the markets are functioning as competitively as we'd expect them to be. I'm pleased to tell her that my honourable friend the Chancellor is meeting with the industry and the banks this Friday to discuss the matter that she's raised, and we'll make sure that she and everyone else gets an update after that.
Completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let the Chamber play out.
And that brings us to the end, as the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, has just said, to the end of this week's session of Prime Minister's Questions. It was really difficult for Rishi Sunak, really under pressure over the latest rate of inflation, the fact that it's stuck at 8.7%, and 24 hours before the Bank of England is most likely to raise interest rates again. I think it's the 13th consecutive time that will happen. And Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, pressed that bruise. with his questions to the Prime Minister. Let me introduce our guest for this part of Politics Live. For the government, Andrew Mitchell, a Foreign Office Minister, Alison McGovern for Labour, Shadow Employment. Welcome to both of you. And Nick Eardley, the BBC's chief political correspondent. What did you make of it and the way Rishi Sunak, a former Chancellor, of course, handled it?
I think it was difficult for Rishi Sunak because he staked so much of his leadership on getting inflation down. But we got a pretty good preview there of what I think the general election campaign is going to look like. Labour are going to blame the government, and the phrase you heard Keir Starmer use over and over was the Tory mortgage penalty. They are going to use that time and time again. And the counter-argument from the government or from the Conservatives is going to be, well, your plans are worse and they'd make inflation even worse. None of it sounds very optimistic, though. It all sounds a bit like you'd do a worse job than us, rather than we're doing a good job.
One of the priorities, the 5 missions, pledges, whatever you want to call it, of Rishi Sunak has been to halve inflation by the end of the year. Do you think you're going to do that?
I very much hope we are, and of course it is the critical thing. If you're worried, as so many of our constituents, and we are worried about the level of mortgage rates, you've got to get inflation down. Inflation is the thief that comes in the night. It steals the value of your savings, and it's got to be eroded. I'm sufficiently old to remember the last time inflation was endemic in this country, and I never want to go back to that. So tackling inflation, which Rishi is determined to do, is the right thing to do, and it got up to 11%. It's now down at 8%. He is determined to drive it down.
It's hugging 9%, and it hasn't moved. It was predicted to come down. It is stubbornly staying higher than the Eurozone, higher than America, despite the fact that we've all shared those global factors. If the government doesn't get inflation down, never mind by halving it, but if it doesn't get it down significantly by the end of the year, do you think politically that's it? You'll lose the next election?
No, I think we will get it down. And the fact that it is stubbornly entrenched makes it all the more important that we do get it down. We're determined to do it. We're doing the right things to do that, and we're also doing the right things to try and help people with the pressures which this inflation is delivering.
Alison?
I thought Prime Minister's question there was a bit bizarre in that Rishi Sunak's claiming that he's tackling inflation on the very day that we found out that, as you say, Jo, that it's stuck. Now, the Bank of England independently sets interest rates. That's absolutely right. It's not a decision for politicians anymore. But there are some structural things that we know can help. France has a participation rate, people working in the economy, higher than us, and it's recovered better than after the pandemic. Our employment rate hasn't properly recovered after the pandemic, and I think we could be doing much more, particularly in those areas that still have problems with unemployment, to get people into work and to get people in work better jobs so they can use their skills in a better way to make our economy much more productive. Those are the things that can help tackle inflation in the medium term. And I think
but what about
the government could be
helping
helping
the short term?
The government could be helping the Bank of England much more than they are by having a better plan for growth for our economy, and that's what Labour would do.
What about in the short term? What about now? Would you intervene? Would you intervene to help people with mortgages, because interest rates are probably going to go up again tomorrow, possibly by as much as 0.5%?
So we're not in government right now. That's why my job today is to hold Jeremy Hunt to account for what he said. He said he's going to meet the banks. I want to know, what's he going to ask of them? How is this going to get real help to people? I want to know that the things that they're going to ask the FCA or others to do are actually going to help people. That's my job today. But if Labour are in government tomorrow, we're not going to be, sadly, because there isn't a general election tomorrow, but if we were, I know that Rachel Reeves and Pat McFadden would go into the Treasury and their priority would be, first, stability. Do nothing that adds to this problem. Second, put people's personal financial circumstances right at the top of the agenda. Rachel's talked about the everyday economy for years, trying to make sure that people do better. Because after 13 years, people are asking themselves, I've had a Tory government 13 years, do I feel better off? And I think we all know what the answer to that question is.
Well, and that's the question that's going to be at the next election. Do you feel better off? Let me just show you this piece, Andrew, from your colleague Jonathan Gullis, another Conservative MP. We must look to Thatcher if we want to fix what he calls the mortgage crisis, because people's mortgage payments are going to continue to go up if they're coming off fixed-term deals, whether it's now or whether it's going to be in 6 months' time. Should there be an intervention, not just meeting the lenders, should there be a direct intervention? He is calling for tax relief for interest payments on mortgages.
What we need to do in order to tackle the level of mortgage interest rate is to get inflation down. What Jonathan is talking about could be inflationary, so it might well not help with that. That's what you've got to do. And I agree with Alison on one point, which is that British productivity is too low and it's got to be driven up. But as I listened to the Prime Minister and to the Leader of the Opposition, I didn't hear from the Leader of the Opposition any different plans. And I think in the combination of Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, the country has running the economy two key people in whom they can have confidence, who are pursuing the right policies and will drive inflation down.
How can you have confidence in somebody who hasn't even got the gumption to vote on an issue as important as the privileges report that we had on Monday? You know, that is so crucial. I was listening to Margaret Hodge earlier. It's crucial for our democracy. How can you have faith and confidence in somebody who can't even be bothered to turn up and vote on that? I just feel it's a dereliction of duty. You know, we had a really strong cross-party contribution from Penny Mordaunt. You know, I said in my speech, I agreed with Penny Mordaunt, I agreed with Theresa May, and even under those circumstances, the Prime Minister couldn't even be bothered to turn up and vote.
Well, just on this, and let's go back then to the core issue, which I'm sure is critically important to both your constituents. Should Rishi Sunak have said something today, made his view clear on the Privileges Committee report, Andrew?
Well, I don't think he was asked today, but...
No, but he didn't have to be. He could have done. He wasn't there on Monday night. We've talked about whether he should or shouldn't be. Should he today have taken the opportunity? It was voted through and endorsed overwhelmingly by the House, but notable that there weren't that many members of the government. You were there. I saw you in the chamber on Monday night. Should he have said something?
Well, the clue is in the title. It's Prime Minister's questions. He wasn't asked, and he should answer the questions that he was asked. But let's be clear, Rishi Sunak made it absolutely clear that this was a matter for the House of Commons. The House of Commons supported overwhelmingly the view of the committee, and that was the right decision. He's a country to run. He's the Prime Minister.
And an MP.
Yes, but I don't mark him down for not being there. The fact is that the House endorsed the report. That was the right thing to do, with over 100 Conservative members of Parliament voting in support of the Leader of the House.
Let me return to the issue of what or whether the government should intervene. Are you ruling out, sitting here today, any direct intervention to help people with their mortgage bills?
Absolutely not. The government's introduced the new mortgage interest scheme, which is now up and running, particularly helping people to fund.
But the Chancellor has said there will not be anything that he considers, as you have said, to be inflationary. So there will be no other scheme. The scheme we talked about last week, actually, is to help mainly people, I think, on benefits. It would be a loan. Anything of direct help, a fund to help people, that's not going to happen.
That's not what I said. I pointed out that there were inflationary consequences to what Jonathan was suggesting. But the Chancellor of the Exchequer called all the lending banks and agencies together at the end of last year to warn about the difficulties that inflation would cause and to encourage them to introduce a huge number of measures. A huge number of measures have been introduced, and the government will keep the matter under review and will do what it can. But what the government won't do is to stoke up inflation, which is at the heart of this problem.
Would Labour, you said, of course, if there were an election tomorrow and you were to win it, would Labour and should Labour introduce the sort of scheme that Jonathan Gullis is talking about?
It's just as I said before, if we were in government tomorrow, we would stick to our fiscal rules because we can do nothing that adds to the instability that we.
So you wouldn't do anything different at this point.
So that's not what I'm saying.
On that issue, you wouldn't.
So in relation to mortgages and financial products and people's personal financial circumstances, look. 13 years, things have got worse, not better. Now we're reaching yet another crisis. So if we were in government tomorrow, stability would be our priority, and we would look at powers. You know, I used to be on Treasury Select Committee. I interviewed the FCA, and I know that they have.
Repossessions are down.
I know that they have powers, and if we were in government tomorrow, we would be having people's personal finances right at the top of our agenda, as Rachel Reeves always has done.
Being at the top of the agenda and actually doing. Let me just ask you this, though, Alison, because Milton Keynes Council, it's being run by a Labour and Liberal Democrats. They've launched a £250,000 homeowner mortgage interest relief fund. What do you make of that? Some people may say they're doing what we would expect a Labour government to do.
Well, I think that what councils expect a Labour government to do is to have a plan for growing our economy in a stable way. And that's why when I mentioned before, some parts of our country, some towns and cities, their employment has not grown in the way that we need it to. There are opportunities for sustainable growth by rebalancing our country. So if we were in government tomorrow, I would, as Minister for Employment, hopefully, please, would be working with councils right across the country to say, how can we use the changing energy economy, the growing parts of our economy to create new jobs, bring people into work who've been left behind, and to make sure that people are able to have sustainable finances. Because you can do things today to make a difference, but we also need that plan for the future for every town and city in this country.
Jonathan Gullis is one Conservative MP offering advice, referring to history. Lucy Allen in Telford is another. She says raising interest rates, which of course is up to the Bank of England, but it is the main tool for trying to bring down inflation, is not working, she says, as a strategy to control inflation. Most people are not mortgage holders, she's written recently, and if they are not immediately impacted by an increase in rates, so it has no impact on their spending. Those that do hold fixed rate mortgages may not feel the impact for some months to come. Has she got a point?
Well, of course she's got a point, but the critical job of the government, and I don't really hear any different plans, although I think what Alison says about productivity in the economy is very interesting, and we should all be working towards it.
She's also saying you've created this problem. It's because of mismanagement that we're in this. But anyway,
I mean, I think that analysis ignores the fact that we are facing similar problems to what other major economies around the world.
No, inflation is higher than most other.
Yes, and there are domestic reasons why that is the case, but that does not mean we should take our eye off the ball in getting inflation down. Inflation is the great enemy. Getting inflation down, which we are determined to do, and I believe we will do successfully, is at the heart of resolving these problems.
Is she wrong, though? Raising interest rates is not working as a strategy to control inflation. I mean, it's true. It's not working yet.
Well, no, it is working, but it is hard. You know, those of us who remember, Jo, what it was like when we had inflation endemic in the economy before. We know how difficult it is.
Yeah, and John Major said if it's not hurting, it's not working.
It underlines the importance of beating inflation. There is nothing more important in running the economy at the moment if we want to get through to sunny uplands under a Conservative government again.
That is why the independent Bank of England will use its monetary policy tools to do what it needs to do. And as politicians, we should do our bit, which is to say, OK, which bits of other government policy can be deployed to make our economy more stable? That's why I'm banging on about the labour market.
Which reveals to some extent that everyone is a bit hamstrung by the situation.
That is exactly why yesterday at Cabinet, we spent the entire Cabinet discussing boosting skills and productivity. And there, Alice and I are in some agreement, and building on what has been a great success in that area to make it even better.
But there's words and there's action. And I think that the public will rightly judge the Tories on the past 13 years.
Well, and they've got the 5 pledges to look at. You say that inflation is the great enemy, and everyone will agree with you broadly on that note. Is recession a price worth paying to bring down inflation? Well,
they said there would be a recession, and Britain is not in recession. And that is very welcome news, and it is partly because of the good stewardship of the economy we've seen by Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak.
But the answer is, if, as economists are predicting, a recession is perhaps necessary in order to bring down inflation, is that a price worth paying?
I don't think recession is ever necessary, and I think that it is to the credit of Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak that a recession has been avoided.
There's a lot of nervousness across the road in Parliament about what the next few months are going to look like for mortgage holders and what it's going to mean for the electorate, who will be making up their minds on the parties on the back of potentially these high mortgage payments. But I am quite struck with a few exceptions, like Jonathan Gullis, as you were just talking about, and like Jake Berry, the former Tory chairman. There aren't many concrete ideas here. It does seem like it's proven to be a really difficult issue for both parties, and I think one of the fears is that if you were to subsidise mortgages or you to throw money at helping people with their interest rates, you would essentially be subsidising private investments, and there's a nervousness over that about that over the road, whether it's right or not.
Is there a nervousness amongst your colleagues? Are they worrying about what's going to happen to their seats at the next election because of this issue?
I think that there is a nervousness amongst all members of Parliament about their constituents' welfare always, and I think in terms of the increase in mortgage interest rates, there is a lot of concern, of course, and that is why I make the points I make about inflation and the tactics and strategy of the government.
This is rightly dominating discussion, political discussion, and has been for the last few weeks. But earlier today, Rishi Sunak was also hosting a big conference of world leaders about Ukraine, about rebuilding Ukraine. He said that we're going to stick with Ukraine for as long as it takes and pledge more than £2 billion in World Bank loan guarantees at the Ukraine Recovery Conference, it's called. What is in this package and what do you make of it? Is it generous enough or not?
Well, Britain is hosting this recovery conference today and tomorrow in London. Everyone is here, all of the supporters of Ukraine, all those who want to beat back the barbarity of what Russia has done by invading a neighbouring country and killing its citizens, destroying its infrastructure. And this is about how we rebuild that. So it's about, on the one side, making sure that Ukraine understands the need to turn their back on old Soviet corruption and to ensure that there is a proper law-abiding rule of law for those who invest, and then making sure that all of us play our part in rebuilding Ukraine when this desperate war is over.
I mean, for people watching the discussion that we've just been having about the economy, can the UK afford to stay with Ukraine for as long as it takes?
We have to do so. The effect on the lives of our children and grandchildren of Russia winning in Ukraine would be unspeakable. And we have been the leading country in terms of delivering military equipment and training and support. I take my hat off to the Ministry of Defence, Ben Wallace and the government for driving that forward, making sure they have the tools to beat the Russians back. And others are following us. We have done a bit on the humanitarian side. Predominantly we do it on military spending and military support. But let's be very clear, we have played our part on the humanitarian side, and organisations like BII, the British government's international investor, will be taking a big part in this and investing in the future of Ukraine.
I mean, they are eye-watering amounts of money that is being pledged, yes, in loan guarantees. I know Labour and Keir Starmer completely support what the government has done. But again, to your constituents, when a Prime Minister, and it could be Labour next year, say we will stick with this for as long as it takes, pledging the sorts of money that will be needed to rebuild Ukraine, how do you explain that trade-off?
Because nothing matters more than our country's security. And I think that the response of my constituents and across the country to the crisis in Ukraine has been really supportive of the action taken. I think it's good to see a return to the UK playing a role with institutions like the World Bank, that multilateralism that the UK played such an important founding role in making sure that the risks that are inherent with the outbreak of war are attended to, not just obviously the security risks, but also the financial risks. And I think that, you know, we have historically played that role through the World Bank and those multilateral institutions, and I think it's good to see us stepping up to the plate.
And territorially, militarily, we've talked about the economics and the finances in rebuilding Ukraine. In your mind, as part of the Foreign Office, does that mean you want to see and will support Ukraine driving Russians out of Crimea and out of the eastern part of the country, the Donbass region?
The important point that all of us should support is the sovereignty of Ukraine, the right of the Ukrainians.
And does that include those two regions?
Well, we're not at that point yet. What we have to do now is we have to make sure that the Ukrainians have the ability, the tools to finish the job, to drive back the Russians. I'm optimistic that that is what they're going to be able to do, and Britain will do everything it can to make sure that they do.
Right, so what does finishing the job mean? What does it mean when people are watching, you know, we'll be there for as long as it takes, we're going to finish the job, we're going to allow Ukrainian sovereignty? What does that practically look like?
Sometimes in politics you should remember the words of Cardinal Newman. O Lord, I do not ask the distant shore to see one step enough for me. The step we have to take is arming, supporting in every way we can the Ukrainians to drive out the Russians who have invaded their territory, butchered their citizens and destroyed their infrastructure.
Right. I mean, you're hosting this conference. It is about rebuilding the country. So this is an open-ended, completely open-ended commitment in that sense. You can't say what it will look like finishing the job, ending this.
Of course not. We don't know how much more barbarity will be inflicted on these people by the Russians.
And my hope is that our relationship with Ukraine and Ukrainians will go on and that relationship will strengthen. We think about the people who wanted to step forward and host refugees in their own homes. I think that relationship hopefully will get stronger, and that will be a good thing.
Do you believe, and does Labour believe, that Russia can be driven out of those areas that it took the outbreak of war, and that's what you want to see?
There's not going to be a difference between us and the government on this issue. But what I want to see is what I said before, which is the United Kingdom playing its proper role on the world stage, being a partner and part of a group of nations that are trying to do the right thing and make our world a safer place. And I think, therefore, the right thing for us to do is to support the government.
And that will mean, and does mean, higher amounts of spending on defence more broadly, which Ben Wallace has been making an argument for. Defence spending had been coming down, but of course it's now going to go up, and that will also be a big cost to the country.
It will, as will, I assume, international aid in the project of rebuilding Ukraine. It is going to be tricky for budgets, there's no doubt about that, but I think you get a sense there that there isn't much of a political difference on this. The question is more one of balancing the books rather than any sort of real debate on whether that money should be spent. It's one of the few things that you don't find much of a division on over the road.
Let's have a look at this story in today's papers, which says Labour draws up plans to flood House of Lords with peers. I don't think we have actually got the graphic. What is this about? I thought Labour was supposed to be pledging to do exactly the opposite. I mean, Keir Starmer said this week he wouldn't have a resignation honours list and has previously pledged that he wants to abolish the House of Lords.
I think you'd have to ask the journalist what it's about, because our policy is to have a smaller elected House of Lords that's reflective of our regions and nations, that brings people from different backgrounds into politics. If you look at the House of Lords today, it's absolutely dominated by people who live in London and the South East. And that's why we want to have a smaller elected House of Lords that does that job of governing our whole country well. It's not unconnected to the point I was making before, which is that our country is so regionally imbalanced. And some of that economic imbalance is connected to the political imbalance. Some parts of our country just don't get a big enough say in how we run the country. So
there won't be hundreds of Labour peers being put into the House of Lords if you win the election next year?
Well, until we have a reformed House of Lords, obviously we've nominated people to the House of Lords, some excellent people, but that's under the system as it is now. We really don't have a choice in that. The last Labour government went some way, taking away the hereditary peers. And so under the current system, you know, we have nominated people, but our priority is to get the centre of British democracy working much better for every single part of our country. I don't think it can be beyond us to do that.
Is it an out-of-date, disgraced system?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I think the real problem with the House of Lords is that when he reformed it, Tony Blair broke the highway code because he entered the yellow box without knowing where he was going to go thereafter. So we have an incomplete reform. And the problem with the House of Commons is that down the years, we all know what we don't want, but we find it very difficult to agree on what we do want. And both sides tend to unite against a reform, which broadly is unpopular in the House of Commons. I do think that there needs to be reform of the House of Lords. And in the unlikely event that the Labour Party were to win the next election, I'm sure that they will find under Keir Starmer that it's a third Parliament rather than a first Parliament activity that they want to take part in.
I mean, I have no doubt there'll be many challenges, but I think the priority is, as I say, to make sure that the centre of government, whether that's Parliament or Whitehall, is working to serve every part of our country to deal with the structural imbalances that is holding our country back.
Sounds a bit to me like you have just confirmed the Times story. You are going to put a bunch of extra people into the House of the Lords, and you are going to make it even bigger
I think,
than it is just now.
Nick, that's wrong. I think if you want to know about the origins of that story, you need to ask someone else other than me who had nothing to do with it.
The way that it was described to me is that this is part of the natural cycle of a new government coming in. You put some people in the Lords because you need them there.
My point was
kind of sounds like you're going to keep doing the thing
my point was that
you don't like.
Keir's already nominated people to the Lords because that's the process as it stands. But our policy is our policy as I have stated it.
Right. I mean, Rishi Sunak was asked, I think, by Meg Hillier, the Labour MP, whether lawbreakers should become lawmakers. What's your answer to that, Andrew?
Uncomfortable.
Could you expand?
Well, I think, you know, that there's an issue of timing there. I know the point you're seeking to make, and it's uncomfortable. But the fact is, he was nominated for the service that he has given. That is the way we do these things. We have these resignation honours lists. And I can well understand the view of the Prime Minister that it wasn't his role to mark the homework of his predecessor, because no one's done that before.
Seems to be a lot of things that are not the role of the Prime Minister at the moment, not the role of the Prime Minister to be voting on a privileges matter core to the well-functioning of the House of Commons, not the Prime Minister's role to intervene on this. For me, this just makes the case for change.
Right. Should Sean Bailey not be, or should be stripped of his honour? Sean Bailey, who stood as the Conservative candidate for mayor.
Fortunately, that's a matter way above my pay grade. And as I've explained what the...
But what's your opinion? You said it's uncomfortable. You said you're uncomfortable with it.
I've explained what the conventions are, and those conventions are there for a reason. So I really can't, I'm afraid, add to your investigations on that.
Right. Well, you're lucky because we've just run out of time. But thank you to all of my guests for this part of Politics Live. I'll be back tomorrow with more at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. From all of us here, bye-bye.